Hello, everyone. This is Dave. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always. Happy New Year. Hope you did have a good New Year. If you're anything like me, as you head back to work, this is what you're thinking about. Yeah, tons of projects and things that I'll need to get caught up again. But anyway, let's get back to it. Okay, so there have been several interesting Rocket Lab updates over the past couple weeks that I wanted to share with you guys, not least of which, of course, Mars sample return updates shared by NASA, as well as some reaction to that by the wider community and myself. Before we get to all that stuff though, if you're new here, I hope you will consider hitting that subscribe button by the end of the video, because every new subscriber helps out so much and is very much appreciated. And if you're not new here, well, thank you for continuing to stay with me, and I'll be sure to check out your comments down below. Oh, and I also need to thank the newest channel member. I'm probably going to get this name incredibly wrong, so sorry in advance, but thank you to Denai Chamad for joining the squad and helping to support what I do here, as well as all the current channel members who have been supporting for many months. Very much appreciated, you guys. Hope you had a great new year as well. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into some Rocket Lab updates. Alrighty, so starting off with the stock, a little bit of a rough couple days, but if you zoom out to a week, then the stock's actually still looking pretty strong, up from about 24.5 to 27.5. Last couple days, as I said, have been a little bit rough, but if you look at the performance of some other space companies and growth companies, Rocket Lab's actually held up okay. Even today, it started down something like 4% and now is only down 1.5-ish. So really pairing some of those gains, and seems to be holding up all right given the overall market environment. Okay, so now we have some updates from the Mars sample return. If you'll recall, I talked about it a lot previously. Rocket Lab did submit a proposal and completed a study for a proposed architecture that they thought they could complete and, bring some value to NASA, complete it for a cheaper price. NASA was trying to decide between about 8 proposals from various companies, as well as internal to the agency, some ideas and architectures they had there. And we had an update from NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. Let's take a quick listen on this one.
NASA is going to explore 2 potential architecture possibilities. And the decision over the course of time, with all the engineering that has to go into it, the final decision is likely to come in 2026. So option number 1 is to use what has already been previously tested and successfully used on the entry, descent, and landing capabilities, and that's the Sky Crane. And it's been used twice successfully on Curiosity and Perseverance. The second architecture, or option 2, is looking at the possibility of going into commercial capabilities of a heavy lander with existing commercial partners. So with the Sky Crane option, you're looking at cost in the range of $6.6 billion to $7.7 billion. That's a far cry from $11 billion. With the heavy lift vehicle, and what do I mean by heavy lift? I'm talking about utilizing commercial partners. You all know that SpaceX and Blue Origin have already been ones that have expressed an interest, but it could be others as well. And a team is evaluating and researching all industry capabilities to include the schedule and the budget to determine the best strategy going forward. With the heavy lift commercial providers, the estimate on the cost would be from a low of $5.8 billion to a high of $7.1 billion. And the direct return would be in the range as early as 2035, but it could go out to 2039. Now,
I do think, by the way, NASA really needs to up their game on these media teleconferences. For one thing, we don't have video, only audio. For another thing, that intro music, if you did hear it, was horrendous. Anyway, all that being said, when it comes to a summary of what Bill Nelson told us, basically they are looking at two options now. One is using their JPL heritage technology, namely the sky crane that delivered the rover to the surface of Mars in the first place, in order to deliver a smaller lander to collect samples down on the surface and send them into orbit. This would cost up to $7.7 billion, so still a savings over what they were looking at previously, which I believe was up to something like $11 billion. But, a very expensive mission. The option two, they say they would use as yet unidentified commercial heavy lift lander to deliver and perhaps return the samples, costing up to $7.1 billion. So frankly, I'm pretty surprised at a few things. First of all, that going the commercial route would only save them something like $600 million and would still cost over $7 billion. That seems very steep. And both options, returning samples between 2035 and 2039, frankly seems quite late to me, and I was hoping it could be accomplished earlier. If only there was another proposal that could have done it earlier and for less money. Now, wait a second. Okay, so this is Rocket Lab's original proposal, the abstract from it, and in it they say that their goal would be to target a total to NASA of less than $2 billion and return the samples no later than September of 2033, with a potential return in September 2031. So Rocket Lab's early proposals saying that they would deliver it earlier and cheaper. Now, we had an interesting article coming out today from Payload Space talking about this. I guess Rocket Lab must have, made some updates in the course of that study, because in these comments from Richard French, Rocket Lab's VP for Business and Development, apparently they say that Rocket Lab would have been able to make the return by 2031 at the cost of $4 billion as opposed to $2 billion. So obviously significantly more expensive than that original $2 billion price tag. But hey, that's still saving $3 billion, even over the heavy lift architecture. NASA specifically calling out Starship and New Glenn, not mentioning Rocket Lab's Neutron there. I get the sense Rocket Lab is not really too pleased with this press conference and how things played out. Richard French saying that we're hopeful that the new administration wants to lean forward into commercial and that there needs to be fair and open competition. Some companies are overextended, aren't meeting their obligations already assigned, and we're not one of those. Interesting stuff. So yeah, I'd love to hear more why they felt that these options costing $7+ billion and, arriving in 2035 to 2039 are better than the Rocket Lab vertically integrated proposal that would be $4 billion. Really would like to see the justification on that. I guess the only thing I can think of is that they don't believe Rocket Lab would be able to do it, or at least not at the price Rocket Lab says. So, having said all that, Rocket Lab is not ruled out completely. They haven't made a final decision. They're just talking about these two kind of lanes, commercial or going with this internal architecture. But we've already gotten a lot of reaction out there online, as you might expect, to a big project like this. So Peter Beck actually ended up replying to this thread by Eric Berger going over these two options, saying, or a better third option, Rocket Lab does it for billions less and years earlier using our proposed architecture. But the reaction didn't stop there from Rocket Lab, because they tweeted out a new web page that they just went live with, talking about their Mars sample return architecture and saying how they'd be able to do it faster and more affordably, as well as saying why they believe they'd be a good fit for the project. And also, interestingly, Peter Beck retweeted this post by Alejandro, and I'm not even going to try to say the rest of the name because I apologize, but I'll get it wrong. I'm saying it'd be interesting if the commercial companies that claim they can do MSR were to consider doing so on their own and trying to get ahead of NASA. Maybe they don't get to it or do it, but what bad can happen for trying. So this leads me to think, Peter is maybe not done with this and is going to continue to work on this architecture and, potentially show that they can do it. So let's take a look at the website talking a little bit about the architecture that Rocket Lab has proposed. So just a quick overview of this webpage here. Obviously a pretty kick-ass image we have, just a render though of the lander vehicle that Rocket Lab would be proposing. You can see their logo on it right there. Obviously propulsive landing thrusters. Obviously that lander, once it lands, this piece would be the Mars ascent vehicle to shoot the samples back up into Martian orbit. The mission overview, obviously launching from Earth, and we can see them sending, looks like 3 separate vehicles, 2 satellites, as well as the lander vehicle, and the one shooting back up from the Martian surface, actually docking in Martian orbit with the return vehicle, and that return vehicle going back to Earth, and then the capsule coming back down to land. So going through the different vehicles, we have the Mars telecommunications orbiter, which would be able to provide support for the other vehicles, communications, and could also serve as an upgraded telecommunications relay asset for surface operations and future missions around Mars. Entry and descent system would come back into Earth looking like a tiny capsule, not unlike the Varda capsule that was situated on a Rocket Lab Photon and previously re-entered in Earth, so they do have some experience with that. This, as we said previously, the Mars ascent vehicle shooting off from the lander and taking those samples back into Martian orbit. That ascent vehicle then docks with the return orbiter, as we see here, and eventually gets put into that capsule so that when they return to Earth, the capsule shoots back down safely through Earth's atmosphere to land on the ground. That is kind of the overall high-level architecture Rocket Lab is thinking about. Also seems clear to me with all these posts, we're releasing this web page the same day of the decision, tweets from the company and Peter himself, that Rocket Lab is not done, and they're kind of trying to win the court of public opinion, and hopefully maybe the new administration changes their mind, or maybe NASA themselves change their mind at some point. But yeah, Rocket Lab still lobbying, at least in the court of public opinion right now, for their own architecture. Let me know what you think. Obviously, this is quite a biased channel, and I'm sure we're all big fans of Rocket Lab, and most of us are shareholders, and this is a very big contract value, but it seems like a pretty good architecture for me, Rocket Lab pointing out, of course, they've already built the twin Escapade spacecraft, scheduled to go to Mars soon, and they have a lot of experience with various interplanetary missions. I have to be honest with you, I wasn't incredibly impressed with this update. I have to say, everyone I've listened to online, nobody seems extremely impressed, not just because they didn't pick Rocket Lab, of course, everyone probably has their pet favorite provider, but also just the fact that, their decision was really no decision. They were thinking about all these things previously, and now their announcement is that they're still thinking about these things, and that a decision will probably come in 2026, and they're still working on several different lanes, really punting it out to the next administration anyway. So what's the point of even holding this press conference? I don't know. I guess I'm not an internal NASA guy, so there's probably stuff I'm missing. Continuing on, defense company Kratos received a very big contract from the US Department of Defense for hypersonic flight test activities. And we noticed very quickly that Rocket Lab was actually mentioned specifically in their announcement. So the list of subcontractors for this contract includes Rocket Lab, Leidos, Northwind, Corvid Technologies, University of Minnesota, and Purdue, as well as others, I would imagine, because we just heard about Alpha, more on that later. But Rocket Lab, the first contractor on the list, so they haven't really said too much about the value that could be coming Rocket Lab's way, but you have to imagine this represents many more Haste launches from them. Hard to say of the exact number, but still good news when it comes to Haste and the continued growth from the hypersonics testing market for Electron. Rocket Lab did react, saying that they're thrilled to be a part of the Kratos defense team for this program and ready to serve the Department of Defense with even more hypersonic technology tests on their Haste vehicles. Haste really does seem to be the fastest growing section for Electron right now. Firefly Aerospace actually tweeted out, interestingly enough, not long after, that they are also proud to serve on the team for this contract with their flight-proven Alpha rocket. and their responsive operations. So I found this interesting for a couple of reasons. One, they weren't actually on the list of subcontractors in that initial announcement, so they must be a little bit smaller perhaps. Also, they haven't been using alpha for hypersonics as of yet, so this would be a first, but makes a lot of sense that they would go after that market, and that basically any market they can serve that's willing to pay them, why not? So Firefly and Rocket Lab, who are frequent collaborators as well as frequent competitors, will both be working for Kratos and the Department of Defense on this contract. Okay, continuing on with the Firefly Rocket Lab partnerships, we do have a tweet here from Firefly talking about their Blue Ghost lander to the moon. The mission is coming up very soon, set to launch at 1:11 a.m. on January 15th on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. We do have a little mission overview here of how the lander will travel through space and arrive at the moon. Interestingly enough, Rocket Lab also working on this lander with Firefly, tweeting that they're proud to help support the Blue Ghost 1 mission with their solar cells and proven mission software, ASI Max flight software, as well as ground systems, along with the support of their guidance and navigation expertise. So even when a mission not launching on a Rocket Lab rocket and the lander is not being built by Rocket Lab themselves, Rocket Lab components and software still making their way into the mix. And that's really the big vision Peter Beck had when he started the space system side, that they wanted to be able to get Rocket Lab components and software on every single thing that gets launched to space eventually. Now, of course, that's probably not going to end up happening with Starlink because SpaceX is going with such a vertical integration strategy. But outside of Starlink, Rocket Lab seems to be making very good progress on the components and systems levels. Also interesting, and I thought I would highlight it here, is that NASA's Parker Solar Probe just made history when it quote-unquote touched, but not really touched. It just got closer than any man-made object ever to the surface of the sun. The spacecraft came within 3.8 million miles of the sun's surface. Now, this was actually launched back in 2018, so back then, Solero was not part of Rocket Lab and was a separate company, but to power the record-breaking spacecraft, they did manufacture two first-of-their-kind water-cooled solar panels designed by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory to help keep them from overheating as they approached the sun. So great work by the Rocket Lab team for some state-of-the-art solar panels operating in an incredibly difficult environment, and just a really cool mission. One more note for you guys. Today, we did have an announcement that Stiefel was lifting their Rocket Lab stock price target, keeping their buy rating. Stiefel Analyst increased their price target from $26 per share to $31 per share, while reiterating their buy. This comes off the back of that Kratos contract we did mention previously. So that's all the Rocket Lab updates I have for you today. Let me know what you think about the big MSR update or anything else we talked about today. Always interested to hear your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, again, if you're new here, I really would appreciate a subscription to help with the channel growth. Hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of the week. See you very soon for the next video. Bye for now.